Today I have the honor of talking to Professor Sam Vaknin. He's a professor of clinical psychology, presently at CEOPS, the Commonwealth Institute of Advanced and Professional Studies. He's a former visiting professor of psychology at Southern Federal University in Rostov-on-Don, Russia. I don't know if I pronounced that correctly.
Almost.
He's he's the author of Malignant Self-Love, Narcissism Revisited, and he's one of the world's leading experts on personality disorders. His work has shaped the way we understand disorders like narcissism, narcissistic abuse, and the devastating impact these dynamics can have on relationships. In my opinion, he's one of the most brilliant minds of our generation. Professor, it's an honor to have you this morning.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for the kind words. I almost recognize myself, almost, but just almost.
Wonderful. Well, today I wanted to talk about borderline personality disorder, especially as it relates to women. What does a woman with true borderline personality actually look like? And actually, what is borderline personality disorder?
Perhaps before we start with your excellent question, I think it would behoove us to have a look at the real statistics. Fewer than 2% in the general population have narcissistic personality disorder. The accurate figure is 1.7%. That is a figure that has been adopted by the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual Committee in 2013. The prevalence may have gone up a bit, so now we're talking about 2%, but that's the ballpark figure. And it's a similar number when it comes to borderline personality disorder. This would mean that fewer than 0.9% of the general population have narcissistic personality disorder as women. In other words, fewer than 0.9% of the general population in terms of females, in terms of women, would have narcissism, and another 0.9% would have borderline.
Around 1%.
One of every 50, that's 50, one of every 50 women might have narcissistic or borderline personality disorder. The other 49 are likely to be out of the range of these disorders. So this is to set the record straight when it comes to incidence and prevalence of these personality disorders. Now, what is borderline personality disorder? It is one of the most severe mental illnesses we know of. The father of the field, Otto Kernberg, has suggested that borderline personality disorder was just the flip side of the coin of narcissistic personality disorder, that they were essentially defenses against each other. He said that pathological narcissism was a defense against borderline personality organization. And so they were close kin. They were like first cousins. And that both of them, said Kernberg, were on the verge, on the edge of psychosis. Psychosis or psychotic disorders being the most extreme forms of mental illnesses we are aware of. And they include, among others, schizophrenia. So this is a serious illness. Now it has 7 distinguishing clinical features which are common to all people with borderline personality disorder, males and females. And about half of all people with borderline personality disorder are men, actually. It used to be a female disorder, but that was the outcome of gender bias and underreporting by men. Men were not.
So it's not more predominant in women?
No, it's not.
Okay, that's a big myth then, huh?
That's a myth that dates back to the 1980s. If you were to read the 3rd edition, 4th edition, and text revision of the 4th edition of the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, they still claim that about 75% of people with borderline personality disorder are women. But they date back to the year 2000. This is antiquated misinformation.
Okay.
By the way, only 20% of humanity use the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual. 80% of humanity use another book, another diagnostic manual known as the International Classification of Diseases. And in the ICD, there is no such thing as narcissistic personality disorder. It doesn't exist. And actually, there's no such thing as borderline personality disorder. There is a generalized disorder of emotional dysregulation or emotional instability or emotional lability, but there's no borderline or narcissistic personality disorder. The DSM is 2 to 3 decades behind current research, behind the times. And yet, it is leveraged by red pillars and self-styled experts and YouTube gurus, and it is leveraged by them, and they brandish it as some kind of Bible of the profession, and it is not. No one in the profession is taking, when I mean profession, I mean academe, basically. No one in academe regards the DSM as an authoritative text. So borderline personality disorder, however, does seem to exist as a clinical entity. Whether it is utterly distinguishable from narcissistic personality disorder, histrionic personality disorder, and even psychopathy is open to debate. Recently, we are beginning to believe that borderline personality disorder may be a form of secondary psychopathy in women. That's the evolving trend currently in the study of borderline personality disorder. But
in women specifically, or
in women specifically.
Okay.
Yes, in women specifically, whereas in men, it's likely to be a variant of narcissism or pathological narcissism. In short, borderline may be a kind of hybrid disorder manifesting more as narcissism in men and more as psychopathy or secondary psychopathy, more precisely, in women. But that's the cutting edge, that's the bleeding edge. It's not yet the mainstream. It's not yet the orthodoxy. Now, there are 7 clinical features which are common to men and women alike in borderline personality disorder, starting with the most prominent and dominant, without which you cannot diagnose borderline personality disorder, and that is what we call affective instability. It is colloquially known as emotional volatility or emotional dysregulation. It's when emotions, both positive and negative, overwhelm the individual, disable the individual, render the individual dysfunctional. The individual drowns in the emotions and is unable to somehow shut them off or shunt them or redirect them or channel them or reframe them or sublimate them or do whatever we do to emotions. The emotions are raw. They flood the individual. It's like flooding the zone, if you wish. So this is known as affective instability. The second clinical feature is what we call mood reactivity. Used to be known as mood lability. Mood lability is ups and downs, cycling between depression and mania. And this is why many clinicians misdiagnose borderline personality disorder as bipolar disorder, which is a mood disorder. Let it be clear, bipolar disorder is not borderline personality disorder, no matter who says that. So we have many clinicians and even scholars who make this mistake, conflate the two when they're not. However, it is true that in borderline personality disorder, there is cycling between depressive and pseudo-manic, euphoric cycles. These, however, are much faster than in bipolar. In bipolar, they take days, weeks, months. In borderline personality disorder, they take minutes or hours. The third clinical feature is the intensity of interpersonal relationships, the drama, the amazing alacrity, the speed with which commitment is affirmed, and the inability to keep the relationship going on an even keel. This underlying instability. By the way, if I had to choose a single word to typify, characterize borderline personality disorder, it would be instability. It's a disorder of instability in everything, in emotions, in moods, in relationships, and simply instability. So the intensity is huge. The drama is overpowering in these relationships, and this is known as relational disorder. So It involves a relation disorder. Why is that? Because the borderline engages in what we call infantile defense mechanisms which are much more typical of toddlers and infants. The adults don't have these defenses. They don't use them. Borderlines do. One of these defense mechanisms is known as splitting. Splitting is dichotomous thinking. When you see everything and everyone in terms of black and white, all good or all bad, totally right, totally wrong, infallible and always erroneous or mistaken, when you divide the world into two opposing camps. And so this dichotomous thinking leads the borderline to a cycling in relationships. So the borderline starts by idealizing, for example, her intimate partner, colleagues at work, neighbors, friends. He starts by idealizing. And then because of the splitting, there is the inevitable devaluation. The idealization is such that it's like setting you up for failure. When the borderline idealizes you, her expectations are so unrealistic, counterfactual, delusional, and sky high that you're very likely to fail her, disappoint her, and she's very likely to become disenchanted with you, which leads her to the devaluation phase. And this is the outcome of splitting. But there are other defense mechanisms at work, such as projection, projective identification, and so on. I will not go into it right now.
Sure.
Twin anxieties is the next. You have to bear with me because it's a very complex disorder.
Sure.
The next clinical feature, and now I'm to remind you, I'm discussing the clinical features which are sine qua non, without which you cannot diagnose borderline personality disorder. The next clinical feature is anxiety. There are even attempts to cast borderline personality disorder as a kind of anxiety disorder. There are similar attempts to describe psychopathy as a kind of anxiety disorder. But in the case of borderlines, there are twin anxieties. There are two anxieties, and they are mutually exclusive. They're contradictory. There is what colloquially is known as abandonment anxiety. The correct clinical term is separation insecurity. There is the fear of being abandoned, rejected, ignored, dumped, let go of. So there's this anxiety, and there is the opposite anxiety of being engulfed, being consumed, being suffocating as a result of intimacy. So the borderline pendulates. She's like a pendulum. She pendulates, she oscillates between a terror of losing, for example, her intimate partner. She becomes clinging and needy and demanding. And then when the intimate partner reciprocates, when the intimate partner expresses love, becomes intimate, supportive, loving, caring, compassionate, attentive, the borderline experiences suffocation. She feels that she's being shackled and incarcerated and imprisoned. She wants to run away. She can't tolerate the intimacy. It is killing her. So this is known as approach, avoidance, repetition, compulsion. The borderline approaches because she craves intimacy and love. So she approaches. And at the beginning, she's a dream. She's a sexual dream. She is love personified and reified. She is subservient and submissive and caters to your needs and always there for you and so on. And then when you reciprocate, when you make the mistake of reciprocating, she runs away. She runs away. She externalizes aggression. She acts out. We can discuss it a bit later.
So were you just describing what's known as love bombing?
No, love bombing is a phase in the narcissist shared fantasy. It's unique to narcissists.
Oh, so nothing to do with borderline.
Nothing to do with borderline. The borderline does not love bomb. The borderline truly is committed to the relationship, truly love, she's capable of love, which a narcissist is not,
Okay.
and truly wishes to make you happy, to cater to your needs, the inception of the relationship with the borderline is a dream come true, and it characterizes healthy relationships as well. It is only a bit later that the twin anxieties kick in. The
Okay.
borderline is constantly terrified that you're going to reject her, abandon her, let her go, dump her. And this is because she lacks something known as object constancy. She doesn't regard you as a constant in her life. You're ephemeral. You're like, because you're a dream come true, you possess a dream-like quality. You can dissipate at any minute. You're ephemeral. So there's anxiety about this. And on the other hand, whenever you try to show her love, whenever you try to be present, whenever you try to afford to provide her with succor and advice, and whenever you try to act as a good partner, she perceives this as engulfment, as enmeshment, as an attempt to take over, a hostile takeover, this kind of merger and fusion, which would render her a disappearing act, would make her vanish. So she runs away, terrified.
Well, I'm glad I cleared that up because a lot of these fake experts, when they talk about borderline personality disorder, they use the term love bombing. Watch out for the love bombing this, love bombing that. And so, but that's not a term that has any relevance to borderline
Not to borderline.
personality disorder.
It is the first phase in the narcissist's attempt to establish a relationship with you. So the narcissist would love bomb you. The clinical term is the narcissist would idealize you.
Okay.
Would idealize you, and then the narcissist would grant you access to this idealized image, making you fall in love with your idealized self. And this you become addicted to this. You become addicted to your exposure to your own perfection. In other words, the narcissist triggers in you narcissistic defenses. You become grandiose in effect. You want to see yourself via the narcissist's gaze as this perfect entity.
Okay.
That's not the case with borderline. Borderline from
So,
the get-go has a realistic, initially, as a realistic view of the relationship, though she does idealize you.
but the idealization from what I'm getting from you, see, because what these red pillars say is there's all these borderline women and they have this inauthentic, they don't use the word idealization, but they describe where they describe basically something like idealization, but with the idea that it's all malevolent, it's all to try to get you to commit to them so that they can then destroy your life. From what I'm hearing from you, it sounds like it is authentic. It's just it's more delusional. Is
And
that fair to
the
say?
narcissist is authentic as well.
Okay.
It's delusional. There's no malice in narcissism and in borderline. None.
Okay.
There is a tendency nowadays to relate to everything, politics, psychology, you name it. There's a tendency to relate to everything as if it were some kind of morality play. Good versus evil, demons versus angels, you know?
Sure.
Narcissists versus empaths, whatever the hell that may be. I have no idea
Yeah.
what an empath.
I want to ask you about that
Yeah.
too. Yeah.
Narcissist versus, so there's this all good and fighting the all bad. And of course, this is a narcissistic defense mechanism, ironically. These people, when they cast the borderline as an all evil, all bad, all wicked person, what they're doing is they're splitting the borderline. Remember, splitting is a defense mechanism where you see other people as all bad or all good. It's a defense mechanism, but it is
Okay.
in adults, it usually is a powerful indicator, strong diagnostic indicator of pathological narcissism. So ironically, these people are likely narcissists. These red pillars, these empaths, all these people are actually narcissists. And
Yeah.
they are splitting other people. So when you see someone online saying, I'm a poor victim of the narcissist, I'm an empath, look what the narcissist did to me, you can bet your last penny in the bank, that this person has, at the very least, narcissistic style, and in all probability, covert narcissism.
Narcissistic style being not quite
Subclinical.
diagnostic. Okay.
It's subclinical in the sense that the traits and the behavioral manifestations or expression of these traits do not amount or cannot satisfy the diagnostic criteria. So it's almost narcissist, but not exactly. Subclinical. So you have
Is
many
it
of these people walking around and claiming to be victims and demonizing borderlines and narcissists, not realizing that that's precisely what narcissists do.
yeah.
Narcissists split other people. When the narcissist idealizes you, for example, you're all good. You can do no wrong. You're perfect. And when the narcissist devalues you, you are the reification and embodiment and personification of evil. You can do no right. You're wicked. That's exactly what narcissists do. Borderlines and narcissists are not malevolent. They're not malicious. They harm people. Let it be clear. They cause serious harm. They hurt people. They damage people. They break people. That much is true. But they do this because they're mentally ill. They're delusional. They're compulsive. They're impulsive. They can't help it. They are who they are. So
Okay. So it's
this
not intentional
demonization
per
is,
se.
sorry?
The abuse when you're with a borderline partner or narcissistic partner is not intentional per se.
No, there is no intentionality in narcissism and in borderline.
But is it fair to say it's inevitable?
It's inevitable, yes, but it's not intentional.
Okay.
People are confusing, especially online, people are confusing psychopaths with narcissists and borderlines. In psychopathy, any abuse meted out is goal-oriented and definitely premeditated and intentional. That's a psychopath. And sometimes a malignant narcissist, which is a combination of psychopathy, narcissism, and sadism. But classic narcissists, both overt and covert, and borderlines, including borderlines who are comorbid with narcissists, in other words, a borderline who is also a narcissist. These people do what they do. They hurt you, they break you, they damage you, they torment you, they torture you, and they do all these things. I'm not denying it. But they do all these things because they cannot help themselves, and they are not aware of the difference between reality and fantasy. They're utterly immersed in fantasy. And as far as they're concerned, this is the only reality. They're sick,
So,
they're mentally ill.
okay. That's important to know. All right. So the two things I've learned, well, I've learned a lot from you, but number one, borderline personality disorder is not common amongst women. It's not every other woman.
Very
And
far
they're
from it.
not malevolent. That's the second thing. How about the red pill narrative that they try to cast men as helpless victims of crazy borderline women? Um, is it accurate to say that some men are actually drawn to true borderline women? And if that's the case, what is the profile, if you could give me, of the type of man that would be drawn to someone like that?
A narcissist. A narcissist would be inexorably drawn to a borderline.
So maybe these red pill stories about borderline girlfriends is true because they all seem to have them.
And or in all
Okay.
likelihood, these people are narcissists.
Okay.
Narcissists,
Why is that though? Why are
yeah.
narcissists drawn to borderlines?
Well, there are actually two major reasons and like 200 minor reasons. I'll focus on the two major reasons. The borderline deifies her intimate partner. What the borderline does, it outsources her internal psychological processes to her intimate partner. In other words, she lets her intimate partner control her. She lets the intimate partner regulate her emotions, stabilize her moods. She allows the intimate partner to become the interface with reality so she suspends her own reality testing. She allows the intimate partner to establish a cult. She is the member of the cult, and the narcissist is the cult leader. And so this caters to the narcissist's vanity, to the narcissist's grandiosity. And the borderline is a perfect partner and participant in the narcissist's shared fantasy. She elevates the narcissist, she hands herself over to the narcissist, and the narcissist has this role of healer, fixer, savior, rescuer, guru, teacher, leader. This is an irresistible proposition. During the idealization phase, the borderline caters to all the pathological needs of the narcissist. On the other hand, the narcissist provides with the borderline with exactly what she needs, or what she believes she needs. Pathologically, this is a pathological belief, but still, she's looking for a rock. She's looking for someone who is supremely self-confident, someone who would isolate her from bruising and harsh reality, someone who would protect her and defend her and idealize her and idolize her and save her and rescue her and so on. And the narcissist plays all this to perfection in the initial phase of the fantasy, the love bombing phase. So this is a process known as co-idealization. They both idealize each other, and only they can idealize each other. That means the narcissist can be idealized by a non-borderline. Of course, there could be a non-borderline who would idealize the narcissist, but this would disappear very fast. The narcissist, if the narcissist partner, when the narcissist partner is a non-borderline, this kind of partner is grounded in reality and is able to discern and observe the narcissist's shortcomings and failures and so on. In other words, her ability to idealize the narcissist is compromised by reality. I'm talking about a non-borderline partner. The non-borderline partner's ability to maintain the narcissist's delusions, to buttress his grandiosity, to cater to his fantasy, her ability is compromised by the fact that she is still well grounded in reality. While the borderline is not grounded in reality, she is immersed in her own fantasy, and the borderline's fantasy is to find a godlike, rock-like, supremely confident, perfect being, which a narcissist is more than happy to provide. So people who are attracted to borderlines inexorably are usually narcissists. That's reason number one, the mutual compatibility, in other words, in terms of pathologies. Their pathologies resonate. My late lamented friend, Joan Lachkar, who was the first to describe narcissistic borderline couples in the early 80s, believe it or not, when no one has heard of these things. Joan used to tell me the archaic wounds of the borderline and the narcissist resonate. They salve each other's archaic childhood wounds. And this leads me to the next reason why narcissists are likely to be attracted to borderlines. The etiology, the causation of narcissistic personality disorder, the history, the personal history that leads to narcissistic personality disorder, the autobiography that leads to the emergence of borderline personality disorder has a lot in common. Both narcissists and borderlines grow up in households which are very, very similar. Households where there is some kind of dysfunction. The dysfunction could be negative, omission, dysfunction of omission, for example, neglect, abandonment, emotional absence. So it could be this, or it could be a problem of commission. So it could be overprotectiveness, spoiling, isolating the child, not allowing the child to separate from the parent, emotional blackmail, emotional incest, and so on. Be that as it may, borderlines and narcissists come from the same household, same type of household. In other words, they belong to the same clan, the same family. They instantly recognize each other. They are both wounded, traumatized, abused children. They share so much, they have so much in common as far as background, as far as etiology, that they are drawn instantly to each other. Borderlines typically say, I have never been this understood in my life. I felt so understood, so accepted. And the narcissist says, I have never had someone like you. I've never had someone who realized what I need and gave it to me. So they fit together because in both pathologies, we have what is known as the empty schizoid core. Emptiness. Now, emptiness is not just a hyperbole or some kind of exaggeration. It's actually a diagnostic criterion. One of the diagnostic criterion of borderline personality disorder is emptiness, internal emptiness. In both the narcissist and the borderline, there's nobody at home, nobody home. Borderlines and narcissists are absences masquerading as presences. They don't really exist except through the gaze of the other. They relegate critical psychological functions to the outside because there's nothing inside to carry these functions out. There's no executive. There's just a huge void, a black hole in both of them. So they need each other. The narcissist regulates the borderline. The borderline regulates the narcissist in many ways. And their fantasy is ironclad because it caters to deep set critical needs and functions of the psyche. So in a way, you could say that the borderline provides the narcissist with some kind of therapy. It's a therapeutic experience. Even when the borderline re-traumatizes the narcissist, and she does very often, it has a therapeutic effect. It is known as narcissistic mortification. What the borderline does, she disables all the defenses of the narcissist, a process known as decompensation. And then the narcissist, defenseless, actually becomes a borderline and is able to get in touch with his long-lost emotions, is able to see himself as he truly is, loses the fantasy, loses the delusion. So it's a highly therapeutic outcome. Unfortunately, the narcissist is ill-equipped to deal with this newfound knowledge about himself, with this newfangled self-awareness. So it leads to borderline outcomes such as suicidal ideation and emotional dysregulation. So, but there is an element of therapy here. Similarly, borderlines report that when they are in relationships with narcissists, they come alive. They feel safe. They say that the world is in technicolor, no longer black and white. They see the world in technicolor. They are energized. They're excited in a good way. Initially, the borderline is good for the narcissist. The narcissist is good for the borderline. They're good for each other. It is only later that the anxiety, the engulfment anxiety of the borderline kicks in, and she abandons the narcissist. She runs away. She acts out. She may hurt and harm the narcissist in some way. She externalizes aggression. Anger is a key feature in borderline personality disorder. Inappropriate anger and uncontrolled anger. So, but it's a later stage. It's a secondary stage. And because the initial experience is so addictive and so rewarding, they keep coming back to each other. They keep re-establishing the relationship time and again. And it's very difficult for them to really part ways and break up. So when you have someone saying, I've all my life been attracted to borderlines, and they kept harming me. This kind of person is most likely a narcissist, actually.
That's very interesting. I've heard some of these self-styled experts make claims such as, borderline women have excessive empathy and they're hypersexual, and that's why men tend to be attracted to them. Is that an accurate characterization, or is there some truth to that? Or what, I mean, they are obviously there's something about borderline women that even psychologically healthy men can be drawn to, because I've heard you say that before. Could you explain that part of it though? What is it about borderline women
It's
that
easy
makes
to
them,
generalize,
yeah,
when it comes to narcissists. Why narcissists are attracted to borderlines? It's easy to generalize because we have all the pathological maps and we know exactly when you talk about the healthy cohort or the healthy population, the heterogeneity is huge. Narcissists are a homogeneous group, while healthy people are heterogeneous. It's very difficult to generalize.
sure,
But I'll try
sure.
to give you a few pointers. First of all, to dispel a myth, we used to think that people with borderline personality disorder were hyper empathic. The truth is exactly the opposite, and it is reflected today in the 5th edition text revision of the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, published in 2022,
They're
where it
less
says
empathic.
they're less empathic.
Okay,
In other
that's
words,
pretty shocking to hear. Yeah.
whereas narcissists are dysempathic, similar to psychopaths. Actually, narcissists and psychopaths possess something which I dubbed, I was the first to describe 35 years ago. I dubbed it cold empathy. It's a combination of cognitive empathy and reflexive empathy, but without emotional empathy. So a psychopath or a narcissist would scan you and would say, oh, this guy is very depressed, is very sad. He would be able to decode you, he'd be able to decipher you. And this requires cognitive empathy and reflexive empathy. For example, reading your body language. So they're very good at that. Narcissists and psychopaths, in this sense, are much more empathic than healthy people. They have cold empathy, like an X-ray machine, which allows them to penetrate your defenses, to map your vulnerabilities, to realize your weaknesses on the fly instantaneously. But once, for example, the psychopath has decided that you are depressed, the next question is, how can I leverage this to steal this guy's money? Or the narcissist would say, how can I have sex with this crying woman? She's crying, she's sad. That's great. She's vulnerable. How can I have sex with her? So there's no emotional reactivity. There's no emotional component there. It's missing. So the narcissist and psychopath have no affective empathy, have no emotional empathy, whereas the borderline does have emotional empathy. And in this sense, the borderline has the full-fledged panoply of types of empathies. However, they're all reduced in intensity. So she has like all types of empathy, but much less than healthy people. That's the current state of knowledge. Exactly the opposite of what self-styled experts online are spewing, the nonsense they are spewing online. So it's not the empathy. Narcissists, for example, don't care about empathy. They wouldn't identify empathy if it fell on their head. On their heads. They don't know empathy. So they don't, it's again some kind of online myth, online nonsense and misinformation that narcissists are attracted to empathic people. Narcissists are attracted to super strong personalities. These are self-aggrandizing claims by people who pose as victims, but they're actually narcissists. So these people go online and they say, I have been the victim of a narcissist because I'm so unique, because I'm so amazing, because I'm so special, because I'm so angelic, because I'm so perfect. And they don't realize that when they make these claims, they are acting the way narcissists do. They aggrandize themselves. It's grandiosity, you know? So the truth is that narcissists are not attracted to empathy. So And we now know that borderlines lack empathy. Had empathy been a critical feature, narcissists would not have been attracted to borderlines. So the fact that they're attracted to borderlines is proof positive that borderlines do not possess the kind of empathy we used to think that they possess. However,
Why was it usually thought that why was the opposite usually thought? Like where's that myth rooted in? If
because
you know.
people confused ostentatious emotionality with empathy. The dramatic displays of emotions were conflated and confused with empathy. We have had the same situation in histrionic personality disorder. Histrionic personality disorder, everyone and his dog claimed that histrionic women are hypersexual. They're into sex. They are flirtatious, they're seductive, they tempt you, they drag you to the bedroom, and they pseudo-rape you there. They are like, histrionic personality disorder is about sex. Why is that? Because histrionic women and men, they are hyper emotional. They are emotionally expressive. So they externalize emotions and they conflate emotions with sexuality. So they act as if they are obsessed with sex. The truth is that histrionic women especially are frigid. They're hyposexual. They're completely uninterested in sex. They find sex repulsive. So sometimes we confuse emotional expressivity or emotional reactivity or emotional dysregulation or emotional manifestations or ostentation in emotions. We confuse these with real underlying psychological dynamics and traits. And that is a huge mistake. That's a big mistake. It's more or less like confusing in medicine, like confusing a symptom with a diagnosis. So a diagnosis requires drilling down. And only when you drill down, you begin to decode and decipher the various interlacing and interlocking mechanisms and processes in the body that lead inter alia to the emergence of this specific symptom. Same with borderline. So the borderline actually lacks empathy. Today we know, and it is enshrined in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual. But it has other things which some people find appealing. I mentioned the drama. Some people are attracted to drama. They seek excitement and thrills and risks. The borderline is very frequently self-harming, suicidal. She has suicidal ideation. She's reckless. She acts out. She's unpredictable. And so some people find her very exciting, very thrilling. And it's like being, in a movie. These people compensate for boredom in their own lives, for the humdrum pedestrian existence, with the colorfulness and the drama of the borderline. She's like a spice, if you kind of spice. The borderline is impulsive and transitions from extreme tenderness, ostentatious kindness, and so on, to the equivalent of psychopathy, externalized aggression, cruelty, very terrifying. This process is known as switching. That is especially true when the borderline is subject to stress, tension, and one of the two anxieties that I've mentioned, the abandonment anxiety and the engulfment anxiety. Then the borderline transitions and switches. It is a terrifying sight to behold, very reminiscent of what used to be called multiple personality disorder. And indeed, there are many scholars, preeminent scholars, who believe that we should subsume narcissistic personality disorder and borderline personality disorder under post-traumatic dissociation post-traumatic dissociative disorder. It's like these are post-traumatic reactions which essentially are constructed around some form of dissociation. And in borderline, we call it identity diffusion or identity disturbance. The borderline has no stable identity. She transmogrifies and shapeshifts from one day to the next. Her values, her beliefs, her conduct, her traits, her physical appearance change from one day to the next. It's like a kaleidoscope. And this, again, some people find very appealing. However, it is founded on dissociation. It is founded on the borderline's inability to maintain continuity of identity, continuity of memories. She has memory gaps, behavioral continuity, doxastic continuity of beliefs, and axiological continuity of values. Her values change. Some people find it super attractive. It's like, being with multiple women at the same time. And the physical appearance can change so dramatically that it is really like being with multiple women at the same time. It's addictive. These people also tend to have a rescuer-savior complex, a healer-fixer complex. They need to save people. They need to rescue them. They need to fix them and heal them and change them and modify them and make their lives better. They are givers. They are people pleasers. They are pathologically altruistic, if you wish. And the borderline, exactly like the codependent, is constantly needy. She's clinging, she's demanding, she has expectations, she is not abashed about expressing these expectations, communicating them. And some people need to be needed, as my wife says. They need to be needed. And so no one needs you more than the borderline. If you're the kind of person who needs to be needed, a medical doctor, for example, then, a borderline is a perfect match because she is the eternal patient. And she keeps informing you that you're having a benevolent, benign effect on her, that you are fixing her, you are healing her, you are saving her, you are rescuing her. This is known as the Karpman drama triangle. It is an element of the drama. And so you feel, when you're with the borderline, you feel that you've been catapulted into Hollywood. It's a two-man Hollywood. It's like on a movie set of some kind. It doesn't feel real most of the time. It feels that you're participating in some kind of script, the access to which is denied you. And at the same time, it's clear that you are the star of the movie, that the borderline is there just to direct you or facilitate you or somehow introduce you into the narrative. You're a captive of the narrative, but you like it because it's an aggrandizing narrative. It's an exciting narrative. It's a thrilling narrative. It's a narrative you don't want to exit. It's addictive. It's very addictive. What's the alternative? Life? What's the alternative? Reality?
Reality, yeah. Well, it's interesting as you describe some of these things, I'm thinking to myself, what's ironic is in a lot of these red pill communities, they tell men, you should only go after women that are interested in you. Like one common phrase is that have burning desire for you. But oftentimes the way they describe it is kind of with some of the traits that you're describing, where women are obsessed with you, tracking your location on their phones constantly, even going into fits of rage for no reason and accusing you of cheating for no reason, and even engaging in, I think what you're describing is, psychotic behaviors where they threaten suicide. These are like heavily romanticized traits online. I don't know if you've noticed that. So it got me thinking that actually that makes sense that many of these red pill influencers, in fact, are narcissists because I guess they are attracted to that in a way. Is that
Well,
fair to say?
it's fair to say, I think, narcissist or narcissistic, at the very least, narcissistic style. However, I must say that, especially in the wake of the pandemic, but maybe even before that, life or reality has become unbearable, intolerable, threatening, unpredictable. The indeterminacy and the uncertainty on the one hand, and the boredom and the rut, the inability to extricate yourself from something that increasingly is perceived as a simulation, pre-programmed and predetermined. This sense of growing helplessness and hopelessness now begins to characterize healthy people as well. And that is why the incidence of depression has skyrocketed and the incidence of anxiety disorders skyrocketed. In certain populations, up to 3 to 5 times more than 14 years ago. No, I'm sorry, 17 years ago. So we have longitudinal studies, and we know that today in some age groups, depression is 5 times more common than it was 17 years ago. Anxiety is 3 times more common. Why is that? Because of reality. And what is the escape from reality? Fantasy. And who are the masterminds of fantasy? Narcissists and borderlines. They've been doing fantasy since age 0. Like they've been training. They are they're the chess masters of fantasy. So we begin to elevate narcissists and borderlines. We begin to let them lead us and teach us and enlighten us, and because they know fantasy better than anyone else. And the alternative is being gradually discarded and held in contempt, which is reality. Reality has failed. Reality is not real. Reality is an organizing principle. Reality is a consensus. Reality is a hermeneutic principle. It's an explanatory principle. There's no such thing as reality. Have you ever eaten reality? Have you ever captured reality in a lab? Have you ever spoken to reality? Reality is an agreement between 8.3 billion people on how to see the world. Now, we have a variety of ways to see the world. We have religion, we have science, but it's still a language. It's still an organizing principle. It's still an abstract. So, yes, it is possible to discard reality and survive. Contrary to the positivist philosophers of the 19th century and 20th century. Absolutely, you can discard reality and survive. Actually, in the vast majority of humanity's existence, we inhabited fantasies rather than reality. What is religion? Not a fantasy? It's a shared fantasy. We survived the Middle Ages, haven't we? Where there was no reality, only a fantasy as an organizing principle. There was no science, there was except in the Muslim countries, but like, in Europe and so on. There was no science, no nothing. There was a fantasy. And it worked well for us. We survived it and we're here. So I think we've had an interlude of, let's say, 400 years since the Enlightenment. We've had an interlude since, let's say, the 17th century. An interlude of reality, an attempt to use a different language, the language of reality. And we failed. We failed. That's the truth. We failed politically because we tried every ism in the book. We tried fascism and socialism and liberalism and Nazism and every ism. None of them worked. Not one of them worked. They all degenerated. Some of them degenerated into Auschwitz and some of them degenerated into woke movements, but they all degenerated. They're not working. So politically we failed. We failed scientifically because science gave us many things, smartphones and penicillin, but it also gave us atomic bombs. And it also gave us a virus, probably that escaped from a lab. I believe that single conspiracy theory. So, science also failed us big time. And who what's left? Who to trust? All the languages of reality have failed. And now we are going back to the languages of fantasy. We're going back to religion. There's a religious revival. We are going back to the occult. We are going back to movies and entertainment, which is a form of fantasy. We're elevating fantasy into politics. So we have actors such as Schwarzenegger and Ronald Reagan and Donald Trump and Zelensky. They become presidents. And so Hollywood now is in charge. It's all fantasy. And who are the masterminds of fantasy? I repeat again, borderlines and narcissists. We need borderlines and narcissists to lead us in the land of fantasy, and we need public intellectuals, such as myself, let's say, to lead us in the land of reality. But I'm an expert. I am a scientist. I'm a physicist, by the way. I'm a scientist. I'm an intellectual, and my services are no longer needed. Because when you transition from reality to fantasy,
No longer needed or no longer valued?
no longer valued and no longer needed. I can't help you much in the land of fantasy because I refuse to give up on reality. I refuse to become religious, for example. To my dying day, I will consider religion a form of delusional disorder. Of course, they believe in nonsensical entities such as God and so on.
So can I ask you this? And I hope this isn't a diversion, but being in an intimate relationship with a woman who has borderline personality disorder, is that a form of giving up on reality as well?
Both narcissists and borderlines have a false self, and both of them have a fantasy defense. The fantasies differ. The narcissist fantasy is about self-aggrandizement, about buttressing and sustaining the grandiosity. So the self-concept, which is inflated and fantastic, defending against vulnerabilities and shame. It's a protective, defensive fantasy. The borderlines fantasy is, I'm going to outsource my mind. I'm going to give someone access to my mind and control over my mind so that I don't have to feel borderline anymore. Because it sucks to be a borderline. When I'm a borderline all by myself, all alone, I want to die, I want to kill someone, I'm hysterical, I'm dramatic, I'm aggressive. I don't want that. But if there's someone in my life who is self-confident, self-assured, reality tested, and is a rock, I can trust him forever and ever, I can let go of my identity as a borderline. I can relax, I can calm down. So these are the fantasies. And yes, if you accept the terms and conditions of the borderline, if you sign on the dotted line, if you enter her fantasy, if you agree to play the role of a stable presence who caters to all her needs, stabilizes her moods, regulates her emotions, tells her what's real and what's not, and so on. If you play this role, of course, you're a figment of that fantasy. You're a participant in it, and you are no longer able to be in touch with reality, because if you were in touch with reality, you would abandon the borderline instantly. Because being with the borderline is self-harming.
Okay. See, and that actually leads me to two things I've heard you say before. One of them was being with a borderline requires high effort coping, and staying with a borderline eventually can make you develop narcissistic traits. Am I accurately representing what you said? And if I am, could you explain how does that happen? For example, how does someone who's relatively psychologically healthy, or at least definitely not a narcissist, how do they become one by being in a relationship long term with a untreated borderline? How does that happen?
You're touching upon the hot wire of psychology. Are we born who we are, or are we made into who we are? Nature versus nurture. If we're born who we are, then no experience, including a relationship with a borderline, can change us fundamentally. However, if we are the sum of our reactions to the environment, the sum total of the reactions to the environment, then change the environment and it changes who we are. So it stands to reason that we are born with some templates, for example, a language template. It stands to reason that some things are encoded in our genes and so on and so forth. No question that our brain, the structure and functionality of our brain, especially as it emerges in the first 21 years of life, all these are boundary conditions. They are constraints. You cannot exit these constraints. You cannot design a new system. You're not godlike. Obviously, you're constricted and limited in what you could become. However, within this space, within this predefined boundary space, which is essentially neurobiological and hereditary space, within this, the variance is so enormous. The number of combinations is literally infinite. So I think the right way to look at it is that we're essentially reactive creatures, and that when environments change, we do change. And sometimes, rarely, but sometimes in fundamental ways. Now, when you're exposed to exigencies and difficulties and vicissitudes and challenges, you react. And you usually react by modifying something. You could modify your behavior in order to obtain favorable outcomes, secure favorable outcomes, and this process is known as self-efficacy. You can modify your cognitions. You can, for example, deny the challenge. This is no challenge. Environment is great. I don't see any problem. So you can lie to yourself. These are known as psychological defense mechanisms. You can modify your emotions, how you feel about the situation. You can say, actually, I like it. This is known as dissonances, cognitive dissonance, for example. So there are many ways we change. I'm not saying that the only way to change is to become a narcissist. Yeah. You could, instead of becoming a narcissist, you could become a people pleaser, submissive, or you could become pseudo-psychotic, totally divorced from reality. I mean, there are many ways to react. One of the ways that you are likely to react to the presence of a borderline in your life is by defending yourself, because you're being attacked. You're being attacked not in the malevolent sense, but you are being appropriated. You're being consumed. You're being subsumed. You are being forced to deny your identity. This process is known as estrangement. You're becoming a stranger to yourself. You find yourself doing things, thinking things, emoting in ways which are unprecedented as far as you're concerned, have never happened to you before. You don't recognize yourself anymore. You're changing. The change is terrifying. And so most people react to this by establishing boundaries and protections of all kinds. One of the most important set of protections are known as narcissistic defenses. We have narcissistic defenses. And so one way to resist the borderline's inexorable influence on you, which you're likely to increasingly perceive as insidious and pernicious. So one of the ways to resist this is to, for example, push her away, mistreat her, abuse her, undermine the intimacy, sabotage the relationship unconsciously, become aggressive, externalize aggression. All these are narcissistic behaviors and traits. Increasingly, you become more and more narcissistic, less empathic, more exploitative. You have difficulty to empathize with her, with the borderline in your life. So your empathy is reduced. We know, for example, that people who've been traumatized have reduced empathy, suffer reduced empathy. People with chronic illnesses have reduced empathy. So, but the good news is that these are usually transient effects, that once out of the ambit and remit of the borderline, not exposed to the borderline, within a few months, or in very extreme cases, a few years, You revert to who you used to be, plus the new knowledge, the new learning. But mostly you become you again. The defenses crumble, are no longer necessary. And so luckily, these impacts are transient. Of course, I'm not talking about situations where the borderline becomes super aggressive, externally aggressive, essentially becomes psychopathic. Very well-known comorbidity, by the way. I'm not talking about situations where the borderline emotionally blackmails you or extorts you by, for example, attempting to commit suicide repeatedly, a very common behavior. This could leave a scar. This could leave a scar and could affect your functioning and your cognitive processes for the rest of your life. For example, if she does succeed to commit suicide, you may feel guilty, you may feel to blame. You would develop what we call autoplastic defenses. You would blame yourself. And this is a lifelong thing. This would be with you for the rest of your life and would impact your behaviors dramatically. So that's an extreme example. Aggression could similarly be, or she could, for example, act out in ways which would hurt you to the quick so profoundly that you will not be able to recover. For example, some borderlines would cheat on you. They would use infidelity, ostentatious infidelity. They would make sure you find out about it. You find about it. They would expose you to what they're doing, you know? And this is known as acting out. The borderline, when she feels that you have wronged her, or when she feels that you're about to wrong her, that is known as anticipatory anxiety. She acts out, she loses it and she acts out. And the aim is to either modify your behavior or to punish you. And the punishment could be very severe. Some people, men especially, don't recover when their partner becomes super promiscuous and has sex with a gangbang with 7 guys, you know. This is an event that there's no coming back from, as far as some people are concerned. So when you're with a borderline, in all likelihood, you will not suffer lifelong consequences, but you are taking the risk of you're playing with fire, definitely.
And this, I've heard you describe that eventually it just becomes very difficult to, you describe in terms of objects, external objects. So the borderline as an external object becomes so painful that in order to stay with her, you create an internal object which has no, and that's what you interact with. Do I have that correct? And
It's one
how does
solution.
that work?
One solution is what we call introjection. Introjection is when you create an internal object, something in your mind that represents the other person. The other person is too painful to be with or to interact with, so you withdraw inwardly. But that is already an extreme pathology. It's, first of all, a very crucial aspect of narcissism. So clinically, you become a narcissist. And if taken to extreme, it's what is known as hyperreflexivity, essentially rendering you psychotic. So yeah, in very extreme cases, this is what you might end up doing, and you will continue to interact with a representation of that person in your mind that is less painful, less hurtful, more predictable, more controllable, and so on, in order to allay or defray what's happening in reality. But that means that you have withdrawn from reality. You're no longer with us. So it never ends well. Whatever the case may be, it never ever ends well.
So relationships with borderlines there's no real way to win long term.
Don't. It's a lose-lose proposition, because the borderline ends up being hurt as well. She's hurt to the point of suicidal ideation or suicidal attempts. She's really hurt. So both parties end up being hurt. But the process, exactly when in narcissism we have the shared fantasy, it has 7 stages. They are preordained. It's like predestination in Calvinism. There's nothing you can do about it. Nothing the narcissist can do about it. It's a deus ex machina. It's a machinery that's put in motion, and is inexorable and has to complete the cycle and restart and so on. It's the same with the borderline. There's a machinery put in motion, and you're both consumed by it. You're both digested by it and torn apart to shreds, shredded by it. You know? These are machineries. That's what I'm trying to say. There's nobody there, clinically speaking. There is, in borderline and narcissism, there has been a disruption in the formation of the self at a very early stage. Consequently, these people don't have a self. They don't have this organizing capacity. They don't have this inner core, this kernel, this operating system, if you wish. They don't have this. And so they have to consume you in order to compensate for this lack. And it never works because the machinery is in the background taking over. And so there is this Moloch, this primitive deity or divinity, which is the shared fantasy in narcissism, the false self in narcissism and borderline, the borderline's fantasy. These Molochs, these ancient, primitive, cruel deities, you are human sacrifice to them. Everyone ends up being sacrificed to them.
Okay, so one thing I can understand how, you have a borderline partner, she acts out, she cheats, she gambles, spends a lot of money. I mean, obviously I could see how that could be highly traumatic, but just in the day-to-day being with them, one thing I've heard you say, they lie very frequently. They're pathological liars. So, and that's a little confusing to me. I guess it's a little confusing. Why are they pathological liars, number one? And then how, being with someone who lies all the time obviously is annoying because you can never trust what they say. But then somehow I've heard also that, that can distort your own sense of reality too, or impact your own reality testing. So is what I just said accurate? And
Well,
how does that
narcissists,
really work, or how does that happen?
well, everyone lies. Like you ask me, how are you? I'm saying, I'm great. I'm not great, but okay, everyone lies. We're not talking about this kind of lies. We're not talking about white lies, or we're talking about lies, Machiavellian lies, lies that are manipulative and goal-oriented. Psychopaths lie this way. They construct an alternative reality by promulgating a lie. And they use the lie to obtain something from you, manipulate you, modify your behavior. That's psychopaths. Narcissists do not do this. Narcissists confabulate. There's a huge difference between confabulation and
So
lying.
they believe it, in other
They
words.
believe the lies. They believe the fantasy. They cannot tell the difference between reality and fantasy. They don't future fake. When they make you a promise, they have every intention of keeping it. They never do, but that's not their fault. It's the fantasy's fault. They are caught in the fantasy even more than you are. The borderline does lie intentionally, but she lies intentionally because she's terrified. She's terrified of losing you. She's terrified of abandonment and rejection and humiliation. Exactly like the narcissist, she's centered around avoiding shame and avoiding the experience of shame. So her lies are manipulative, her lies are goal-oriented, but whereas the psychopath's goal is power, money, sex, access, contacts, you name it, the borderline's goal is the maintenance of the fantasy with you. She just wants you to be there. She doesn't want you to walk away. So she would lie about this. And the borderline is very childish in this sense, very infantile, because she usually would expose her own lies. Whereas the psychopath would continue to lie, never mind what evidence to the contrary you present, even in court. The narcissist would continue to lie, not because he is lying, but because he believes his own lies and he thinks your evidence is tainted or fabricated. The borderline would continue to lie up to a point, and then she would expose her own lies. She would even either confess or she would undermine, sabotage self-defeat and make you find out that she was lying. Introduce you to the lie indirectly. She would leave a smartphone lying around with messages to her lover so that you find it.
Actually,
She would self-undermine. So again, you see, we have a symptom, exactly like temperature, fever. We have a symptom. The symptom is lying. But you see the disparity, this is disconnectedness between the types of lies. And it's wrong to conflate all these, which is
yeah,
what,
it's a great deal of nuance there then
yes,
for
huge.
sure. Because none of those three things are technically the same at all. So, um, how about just the impact on the partner, in terms of just constant lies? Sometimes borderlines, it seems, they lie. I mean, when I say for no reason, I know they have a reason, but it almost seems like silly. Some of their lies. What's the effects of being with a partner who just lies constantly?
Well, you're being gaslit. You
Okay, so
gaslight.
that's actually what I was getting to. Gaslighting, that's another common phrase used by self-styled experts. I've heard you say narcissists do not gaslight. Well, what is gaslighting? And do borderlines gaslight
Gaslighting,
their partners?
borderlines gaslight, yeah. Gaslighting is a premeditated, intentional, and planned attempt to make you doubt your own perception of reality and your own judgment by presenting to you a plausible alternative reality which conflicts dramatically with the way you perceive reality. So there are cumulative elements in gaslighting, and the absence of any one of these elements render the action not gaslighting, even if it looks like gaslighting. If you, for example, are a narcissist or a psychotic person, and you're unable to tell the difference between reality and fantasy, there's no way you can gaslight. The gaslighter, the person who initiates the gaslighting, knows the difference between reality and fantasy and superimposes the fantasy on you, tries to convince you that the fantasy is the reality, but they never lose sight of real reality. They know what they're doing. Now, borderlines do that. Yes, they construct an alternative reality, and then they try to convince you that you're the one who's crazy. For example, a borderline would cheat on you, then she would come back home, and you would say, I found messages on your phone with the assignation and the place, the date, and the actions involved. And she would accuse you of being paranoid. She would say you're overly jealous, you're controlling, you're paranoid, so that's an attempt to construct an alternative reality where your alleged mental illness is the cause for these accusations and not the real reality, the facts, factual reality. And therefore, borderlines do gaslight. They know exactly what they're doing. They also lie, which makes this disorder much closer to psychopathy. Again, the difference between a psychopath and a borderline is that psychopaths are interested in what you and I are interested. They want money, they want sex, they want, Psychopaths, in my perception, my thinking, psychopathy is not a mental illness at all. It's not a clinical entity. It's a social problem, social failure, if you wish, but I don't see any mental illness here. I want money, the psychopath wants money. The only difference between me and him, I am not willing to kill for it. He is. How does that make him insane? How does that make him mentally ill? Why is that a mental health disorder? It's an axiological problem. It's a value. His values are different. He values money more than human life. I value human life more than money. Is there any way to say that my value system is privileged, superior to his value system? No, there's no way to, we can all agree that my value system is nicer and more accommodating of human existence and more likely to function in society. Okay, These are utilitarian arguments. But it's a value system. Psychopath simply believes that his goals justify any and all means. End of story. That is nothing to do with mental illness. That is a value system. And in some societies, Nazi Germany, for example, psychopathy will be a positive adaptation. Generally speaking, this attitude in clinical psychology or psychiatry to say this is bad, this is good, we need to medicate against this, it's a wrong approach. Take, for example, depression. If you talk to a psychiatrist or a clinical psychologist, they would tell you depression is bad. That's a bad thing. We need to medicate it out of existence. We need to give people antidepressants, or we need to talk to them, talk therapy. Depression should be eradicated. Everyone is in panic that depression is rising. But let me ask you this. If you are an inmate in Auschwitz and you are not depressed, are you not mentally ill? It is the absence of depression in Auschwitz that signifies mental illness.
So was Viktor Frankl mentally ill?
Viktor Frankl was heavily depressed. He fought his depression by inventing meaning. He created meaning.
That was coping, I guess.
It's a coping strategy, exactly. He said that meaning can fight off the depression. He warned against depression because he experienced depression. But if you are happy-go-lucky, all smiling and cheerful in Auschwitz, definitely something's wrong with you, wouldn't you say?
Sure.
So it's context dependent. It's contextual. You cannot generalize. It's contextual.
Axological switching, you mentioned. It's a trait of borderline personality disorder. One thing these red pillars say about women in general is that, don't worry about a woman's politics. When she really likes you, all of her values will just align with yours or switch to match with yours. But that's it's not normal for people to do that, right? That's not a healthy trait.
I don't even know how to relate to this. There are some societies, patriarchal, misogynistic societies, where a woman is expected to follow her husband's political convictions, vote the same way the husband votes. Husbands deliver the whole family to the voting booth, and so on and so forth. These societies are still stuck in the 4th century or 10th century, I don't know what. But in modern industrialized societies, especially Western ones, and I believe also in China, India, Israel, Russia, where I've lived, it's unthinkable that a woman would change her values and beliefs just in order to conform to her husband or lover or even colleague or even boss. However, interestingly, because borderlines suffer from identity diffusion and identity dissonance, they don't have a fixed core identity, it is true that the borderline will try to mirror the partner because she hands over these internal functions, internal regulation to the partner. This is known as external regulation. The partner has control over her mind. So she adapts to the partner. She becomes an extension of the partner, a mirror image of the partner. This is much more likely in borderline women and men, by the way, than in a healthy population. That part is true. Yeah.
Okay. How about hypersexuality? Are borderline patients hypersexual?
You asked me this before. Borderlines are reckless and impulsive. Okay. These are two clinical features of borderline, recklessness and impulsivity. In other words, borderlines do not contemplate the consequences of their actions, and they act on impulses. Borderlines are also a lot more likely to abuse substances, especially disinhibiting substances such as alcohol.
Okay.
This confluence, this combination of factors, that they don't care about consequences, they act on impulses, and they're drunk most of the time. You put these three together, and you get a promiscuous person. I think they're confusing promiscuity with hypersexuality and hypersexuality with good sex.
Okay.
Promiscuity is about availability and opportunity. A promiscuous person is a person whose main trigger, behavioral trigger, is availability. A promiscuous person finds someone, that person is available, they have sex. He's triggered to act. Opportunity. It's an opportunist. That's a promiscuous person. A hypersexual person is a person who is compelled internally to seek sex unceasingly, day and night, even when the sex is ego-dystonic, even when the person hates the sex, doesn't want to have sex, is tired, exhausted, on the floor, can't stop, just simply cannot stop. Hypersexuality doesn't have to involve partners. We know, for example, of compulsive masturbation, which is damaging to the body, has bodily impacts. So this is hypersexuality. Borderlines are definitely not hypersexual. Borderlines go through long stretches of celibacy. It's very common in borderline. That is not possible in sexual disorder, where the compulsion is ever present. There's no gap or pause or relief. It's always there. The borderline, for example, when she's rejected, humiliated, especially in public and so on, she withdraws. She becomes avoidant, and she could spend 3 years, 3 sexless years with no sex. So there's no hypersexuality. There is promiscuity, definitely. But the promiscuity is the outcome of underlying features such as recklessness, such as impulsivity, and so on. Borderlines also weaponize sex. That part is true. They are aware that their sexuality endows them with some kind of control over the potential or actual intimate partner. So they trade, they barter sex. They use sex as coinage. And they trade sex for favors, for presents, for a relationship, for... All this has nothing to do with the quality of sex. Quality of sex. Actually, we know that people who engage in one-night stands, which is the overwhelming type of sexual activity of the borderline. Borderlines report that the vast majority of their experiences are one-night stands. They don't want it to be a one-night stands. In about 60% of the cases, they hope that the one-night stand would lead to a relationship, but it doesn't in the majority of cases. So they end up having an experience of casual sex, mostly. We know that casual sex sucks, especially for women. In casual sex, anywhere between 10 to 15, that's 15% of women experience orgasm. 80 to 90% do not. Even men in one-night stands, only 53 to 57% of men experience orgasms. 40 to 50% of men do not. Casual sex is really inferior, low-quality, biak sex. Not the kind of sex you want to have. And that is the major experience, the predominant feature of the sexual life of the borderline. So how good can she be? You know, her sexuality is actually not qualitative.
Interesting. Well, Professor, I don't want to take up too much of your time, but I was hoping I could ask you maybe a little bit off topic, but I think related. There's a lot of men find themselves in these red pill communities because they have difficulty. They're lonely, basically. And a lot of it has to do with they want to blame women. And at least that's why I think they end up, you know, black pill, red pill, whatever. Even if those are wrong approaches, I have to be delicate about this. Is it fair to say that the relationships or the dating experience of young men and women today, why it, first of all, it's reported widely that it's very difficult Do you agree with that? And why is it so difficult? Why are so many young men lonely? Why are a lot of young women, in contradistinction to what red pillars say, where they say every woman is promiscuous, high body count, etc. Actually, we know that a lot of young women are celibate, correct? Or there's increasing
Correct.
celibacy. So why are these things happening? Why is it so difficult for young men and women to relate to each other? And why are we becoming increasingly celibate? I don't know if that's a question you can answer in
It's a
15
question,
minutes,
but I
but
think it requires a different separate interview.
yeah.
But in a nutshell, first of all, promiscuity is a myth. The frequency of sex has been declining precipitously over the past 20 years. And among people younger than 35 years old, the frequency of sex is much lower than among baby boomers. Also, the number of sexual partners is lower in the population, the cohort under 35 years old. Younger people have much less sex, fewer times with fewer sexual partners. Promiscuity is dead. Second thing, only 2 to 5%, depending on the study, of women would be characterized as promiscuous. And the definition is women who have had more than 9 sexual partners prior to age 20. That's
That's 5%, less than
That's
5%.
less than 5%, typically 3%, depending on the study. There's been a single study with 5%.
That's far
And
lower than commonly believed then.
that's
Yeah.
far lower than commonly believed. And the actual average of sexual partners per woman in the industrialized world is, depending on the country, between 4 and 7. Lifelong. Lifelong. Which is still a hell of a lot more than perhaps our grandmothers, but a lot less than baby boomers. A lot less than baby boomers, by the way. So, promiscuity aside, there's been a major transformation of women. Women have become men, and we live in a unigender world. Whereas prior to the 1980s, 1990s, we had 2 genders. Genders are a social construct. They're socially constructed. They are performative. It's a performance. You're born and you're told to behave as a boy or you're told to behave as a girl. This is indoctrination. It's inculcated in you. It's part of the socialization process. Gender should not be confused with sex. Sex has to do with genitalia. Sex is a biological thing. I reject the notion of sex assigned at birth. That's nonsense. It's genitalia, basically. It's biological. But biological sex does not necessarily go hand in hand with gender. There are definitely multiple, hundreds of societies and cultures where genders are much more fluid and have a lot less to do with your biology, with your genitalia. There are even societies where a woman can choose to be a man. For example, in northern Albania, believe it or not. So until the 1990s, we had 2 genders. They were clear, they were demarcated. We had scripts. The scripts informed us how to behave, how to flirt, how to become a husband, how to become a wife, and so on and so forth. The scripts were highly stereotyped, definitely. The gender roles, as they're called, were highly stereotyped and highly performative. It was a performance. It was like a theater production. You had to wear specific clothes, and the clothing was a form of signaling. You had to behave in a specific way. You had to say no, even if you wanted. You had to say yes, even if you didn't want to, etc. And there was this, So this was an environment with a very high level of certainty. You knew how to behave. You knew what was expected, and you knew what the outcome would be, grosso modo, more or less. If you didn't deviate too much from the sexual scripts and social scripts, expectations, mores, norms, and conventions, the outcomes were more or less the same. So it was a highly predictable environment. Then in the 1990s, a revolution started in terms of gender roles. It was partly deconstructed intentionally by academics, and partly it was grassroots, a natural extension of feminism Second wave feminism became third wave feminism. Third wave feminism became fourth. And what has happened is women decided to become men, widely decided to become men. We are not talking about a fringe phenomenon. And when I say they decided to become men, I'm not talking only about wearing trousers or pants. I'm talking about self-concept or self-perception. In 1980, we conducted a study and we asked women to describe themselves using 9 adjectives. And they chose 9 adjectives which conform to stereotypical gender roles. So they chose compassionate, loving, caring, empathic, feminine, while men in the same study chose adjectives such as competitive, ambitious, aggressive, you know. Fast forward to 2000, I think 21 or something like that. I don't remember the exact year. Fast forward like a few decades. Women were asked the same question. Studies by Lisa Wade and others asked the same question. This time, women adopted male, masculine adjectives, exclusively almost. 8 out of 9. 8 out of 9 adjectives used by women. These are giant studies. One of them involved more than a million women. 8 out of 9 chose what used to be stereotypically male adjectives, including aggressive, competitive, go-getter, and so on. So it was women who decided to become men because women reached the rational conclusion that men had it better. Men were more free. Men had more opportunities. Men were judged less or more charitably. Men had it going. Men controlled the world. Men owned the world, and they wanted to be men. And so they transformed their identity. Women transformed their identity. I'm not blaming anyone. It's a historical process. And they became men. It started a long time ago. It started 150 years ago. And then in the two world wars, there were no men. And women became men. They worked in factories and, they did everything. When the men returned, women were already in the workforce and they became consumers, which capitalism liked a lot. So capitalism egged women on, wanted them to continue to become consumers. And capitalism is the antithesis of intimacy and family. We can come to it at some other time. So now we have a unigender. We have 2 types of men with penises and men with vaginas. And that creates major problems. Major. For example, in terms of aggression. If you're a woman and you're playing the stereotypical gender role, male aggression would be perceived as flattering, as a positive thing. The man is going after you, he's hunting you. You're not the prey, you're the desired object. When you're a stereotypical trad wife, yeah? When the man is aggressive with you, flirts with you aggressively, that's something to look forward to. It's a compliment. But when you're also a man, the male aggression is just that, aggression. So this creates conflict, an adversarial attitude. Me too. You have me too. And today, young men, justifiably, are terrified to date. They're afraid to approach women. I'm talking about studies. This is not anecdotal speculations. Studies show that young men are terrified to approach women. There are all these rumors about, a woman can accuse you of rape or it's crazy out there. Simply a terrifying scene, It's a terrifying scene. So there's a weaponization of the legal system. Sometimes, rarely, justified. Vast majority of cases, not. But from the female point of view, from the woman's point of view, it is justified because I'm a man. How dare you do this to me? How dare you attack me before I give you permission? I'm a man now. You don't get to do this to me. I'm no longer a woman, There's a change in mindset, which is fundamental, colossal. And men don't perceive this. Men generally, I'm generalizing. We don't perceive this. Even me, I'm supposedly aware. I'm analyzing it. I don't perceive it. I can't internalize. I can't. It's not in me. It's not. I don't have what Freud called insight. I don't really digest this. Men, young and old, regardless of age, regardless of culture, regardless of society, religion, you name it, they are aghast. They become defensive, and then they become aggressive. They want to roll back the time, roll back time. They want to reverse the clock. They become reactionary. And they think that they can reimpose stereotypical gender roles on women. It's too late. We have lost this. Unfortunately, we have also lost the charm in the pursuit, the attraction, and any motivation and incentive to establish anything long-term whatsoever. Also, of course, we lost the motivation to have children because children are a disproportional, asymmetrical burden on the stereotypical woman, the new woman, the unigender woman, the men with vagina would perceive children as an imposition, a form of imprisonment, an unfair division of labor. When you're a man, I mean, try to put yourself in the place of a woman as a man. Now think of a woman as a man. Would you have agreed to any of this? I doubt it. It's and so I think having lost the classical gender roles and not replaced them with anything, it's not that we have redefined women. Women are imitating, by the way, the worst men. Women are imitating psychopaths. Women are imitating bullies. Women are imitating narcissists. They're not imitating hardworking, honest men. They're imitating the scum of men. Because these were the men who mistreated them.
Chauvinists, basically, yeah.
The chauvinist pigs, they're imitating these men because these were their abusers. These men were the abusers. And now women said, I'm going to be the abuser from now on. This is a very common reaction in abuse. When we study abuse and trauma, we know that one of the most common reactions is when the victim says, I'm going to be the abuser from now on. Pathological narcissism is when the child says, I'm being abused, I'm being traumatized, I'm being mistreated. And from now on, no one is going to do this to me anymore. I'm going to become the abuser. And that's exactly what women are doing. Women are saying, these psychopaths, these narcissists, they abused us. We're going to become psychopaths and narcissists, even more than they have ever been. And this is the situation now. It's a war. It's a gender war. What dating are you, what is dating? What dating are you talking about? It's a war zone. Dating apps. By the way, the Pareto bullshit is bullshit. That's not true. No studies. There have been like 2,000 studies. Not one has found this Pareto division, like 20% of the men take 80% of the women or vice versa or whatever. That's nonsense. There's no grounds in reality. It's not true. Actually, multiple studies in the past 10 years show that women prefer what the red pillars call beta males. Because women are now ambitious and competitive, they want submissive men. They don't want alpha men. On the very contrary, if there is any Pareto, it's exactly the opposite. So, and that applies to one night stands as well. We have studies of casual sex, and we found that the majority of women select subservient, submissive losers for one night stands because they just want to use the bodies. They masturbate with the bodies. So
fascinating.
Yeah, that's a picture. It's not a nice picture.
Very dark picture.
Yeah, it is a dark picture. Yeah.
Professor, thank you so much for your time. I'd love to talk to you again about that issue in particular. But your insights are amazing. I know you have 4 different YouTube channels. Your main one, Professor Sam Vaknin. At this point, thousands of hours of informative, wonderful lectures that people can check out. But thank you.
Can't stop talking.
Thank you.
Doctor,
Thank
help
you.
me.
Well, thank you so much for your time, and I hope to talk to you again.
Thank you.